Hello and welcome to Board Game Bonkers. I'm JC, and today we're going to talk about the top 10 most frustrating board game mechanisms. No, not mechanics. There is a difference. Let me explain what a mechanism is. Well, a mechanism is a system of parts working together to function a machine. And a mechanic is a skilled person, individual labourer, for example, that's making a machine function or repairing that machine to work. So in a board gaming sense, you're perhaps doing something to manipulate or change something to make it work. So collect resources to build this. That's mechanically doing something to make that work. Whereas the mechanisms are the functions of the game itself, and that's the difference. So today we're going to talk about these top 10 frustrating board game mechanisms, and this is what you, the board gamers, the general public, and myself agreeing with this list have chosen. That's right, I've scoured the internet, I've looked at YouTube videos, I've been in Discord, I've been looking around, talking to people, finding out what's the most frustrating board game mechanisms that they can think of, and this is the top 10. We could do it in order, starting with the least frustrating to the most frustrating. So start kicking off with our number 10 is semi-cooperative. Now, a lot of people don't mind semi-cooperative, quite enjoy it, and I can only think of one game that functions really well, and that is Nemesis. Now, semi-cooperative is, well, you're all working together, but you might have hidden objectives or hidden agendas where one person perhaps is doing something completely different to all the other players. Their end game's objective might be completely different. And that is semi-cooperative. So there's certain elements of the game you're cooperative working together. For example, the Great Wall, you're working together to get resources. But you can also cutthroat people by saying, well, I'll help and join you, and then at the last minute you might change your mind and say, no, I'm now going to go here instead. So that is kind of semi-cooperative. You've got your own objective, your own way of how you're going to win the game, but you're also at times working with other players, and that may be for the duration of the game, or it might be just in parts of the game. Now, this is why it's frustrating, because I'll give an example. In the Great Wall, we work together, we agree, we're going to get these resources because we need so many people in those worker placement spots. And at the last minute, you decide not to after I place my person. That means I don't get resources. And now you go to a spot where you get resources. How is that fun? How is that fun for me? That is extremely frustrating. It can break friendships because you've now backstabbed me and said you're going to get that. Now I'm not going to do a deal with you in the future. So therefore the rest of the game we're bittering and we're disagreeing and no, we're not going to work together. And it just spoils the game. I can use another example where it's absolutely stupid with the semi-co-op used, and that's Castaways. Castaways is quite an old game. I really enjoy it. The semi-co-op element is absolutely stupid. It's just played cooperatively. So you have these books, these storybooks. Now, you need the storybooks to use sometimes during the game because they'll help you. But at the end, whoever has got the most of those books is the ultimate winner. But you're all cooperatively trying to get off the island together. It is stupid. It doesn't make sense, and that's where semi-co-op just gets down the silly route. But semi-co-op doesn't work as well because of those reasons I gave: the frustration, the backstabbing, the downbeat, the frustrations and the depression it can create, and that sense of worthlessness because you've been backstabbed. You've had players, you feel that you're doing really well, you're about to win, and all of a sudden a group of players crush you because that's just the way the game works. Now, there's lots of different examples I can give, but semi-co-op doesn't work because it has this slice of two halves. It has your brown bread and your white bread. Now, some people love white bread and some people love brown bread and hate the opposite. Well, it's a bit like that. It's a bit like Marmite, you either love it or you hate it. So semi-co-op's the same thing because you're working together and all of a sudden I'm going to stab you in the back and do my own thing and be really mean. Well, that doesn't sound fun. It's not fun for the other players. I think this is broken. I think semi-co-op doesn't work. I don't like it. I have another semi-co-op game to try and give it a go. That's Hijacked. I'm going to see how that functions. But the only game I've come across it works reasonably well, and that's Nemesis. Nemesis is actually quite a good game, and that's the only game I can see that this is worked. But generally, semi-co-op doesn't work. It's broken. You're not working together. You either choose one, you're either working together or you're not. How can I do both? They're both polar opposites. One is so extreme to the other. I'm working on my own to try and win. and working together and being friendly, they just clash. It creates that tension, it creates that unease, and it creates other feelings. It's not nice to be backstabbed in games. So let's now move on to number 9, and that is roll and move. Now, thankfully, the majority of games do not have roll and move unless it's a children's game, although Ghost Fighting Treasure Hunt is an example of that, where it's roll and move, you rolling and moving. And it is frustrating because you might roll a low number all the time if you're moving less spaces than other players, and it can be extremely frustrating. You feel left behind. Well, it's not my fault. I've rolled a 1. Why? I keep rolling 1s and 2s. This is not good. So roll and move is really frustrating because it limits any choice. You have no choice. If there's no way of manipulating the dice, then you're bound by what the outcome is in the die roll. That's not fun. Now, it is still prominent in a lot of these tacky children's board games you see in supermarket shelves, especially in the UK. I wish to death they would just get rid of those games because they're horrendous. And it's constant roll and move, roll and move. Now, kids love rolling dice, that's great, but there's better and fun ways to roll dice and not have roll and move. It's boring, it's dull. You have no choice, no option. It should be dead to the water, and unfortunately, we'll still see it in these really tacky, dreadful children's games. So let's now move on to our number 8, and that is constant upkeep. So changing resources to this, to then change resources to that, and then to this, and then to that. So it's fine if you're doing that maybe once or twice now and again, that's perfectly fine. And Pillars of the Earth is an example. You swap some resources into another, or swap resources into points. So that's fine because you're not doing it consistently all the time. I'm talking here more deeper resource changing into another. So you change one resources and then into another, into another, into another to then give you this resource, but you're doing it all the time. That can be really frustrating and fiddly. And a lot of players don't like that because it's just constant upkeep. You have to constantly keep changing it. Or on the board, you have to constantly change these 1,000,001 resources with another 10,000 resources. Okay, I've exaggerated. And then you do it again every single round. It's time consuming, it's frustrating. That's what we call a lot of heavy upkeep because it can vastly increases the time you spend playing the game, and it's not fun changing constant resources, whether that's you doing individually through your actions all the time, or whether, which is not as bad as all the time at the end of the round or the end of the turn, you constantly have to change resources on the board, especially if there's a lot of resources. Designers have got to find a way to try and minimise that downtime, and fortunately still a few games today still have that constant upkeep. So let's now move on to our number 7, and that's unmitigated die rolls. So we talked about this at number 9, didn't we? Through roll and move. So unmitigated die rolls means I roll the die, I have no way of changing the outcome of that. So I am penalised by the luck of the die roll. I've got no choice and options. Now, if we look at a class like Alien Frontier, so you can roll the die, but you can get cards that will help you manipulate those die. That's fine because I might use that as part of my strategy, or you can just take your luck and just roll the die. That's okay because you can have some choice. But where games give you no option to mitigate any die rolls, you just roll and that's what you get, that is frustrating. It feels underwhelming because you may get terrible rolls all the time. Well, you're at a major disadvantage over the other players who get great roll outcomes. So unmitigating die rolls isn't fun. They've got to find ways to introduce the rules and mechanisms that allow you to mitigate the dice and change them or upgrade the dice to better dice. At least something, and makes it feel satisfying, not damn right depressing. So let's now move on to our number 6, and that is probably one of the most frustrating ones that I have. One path to victory or one way to play. Now, you can understand that in really small, quick games, like Deep Sea Adventure is pretty much one way to win. Well, there might be a couple of ways to win, but it's pretty much one main way, pathway to finish. But that's a simple, 15, 20-minute game designed for children and families. But when it's a fairly decent midweight game or a heavy game and you have one path victory or one main function, one main strategy to win the game, it makes it feel boring and drab. If you're constantly doing the same thing and everyone's doing the same thing, so it becomes this race, you can do it more efficiently and better than the other players. rather than having an option to say, well, you can use this path or that path of victory. I much prefer games, and I'm sure a lot of people agree, where I look at games, if it's a kind of starting getting towards a heavy, I want at least three different pathways. If it's medium, 2 to 3. If it's light, at least a couple, if possible, of pathways. Having just one pathways isn't exciting because you're just doing the same thing all the time, and eventually you'll get bored of that game. And it doesn't make the competition great either because you're all doing exactly the same thing. So that can be frustrating, that mechanism where the game prevents you from having another strategy. You're restricted by the one pathway. So let's now move on to number 5, and that is artificial catch-up. So I'll give an example. The more income you have, the more you lose. And the games that do that, after Empire, for example, or you have a mandatory quest in Lords of Waterdeep. So you have these intrigue cards, and you can, as a kind of take that card, so it might be a catch-up mechanism, but it's artificial because you could be the one that's miles in front and you give that card to the player who's miles behind and they get penalised. You have to take this quest on that's absolutely rubbish and you get about 2 points and you have to waste all your resources, all your people to go on that quest instead of the quest you want to go on. Well, it's artificial because it's not giving it to the player who's miles in front. Or I'm getting penalised for doing well in the game. That's not satisfying. That doesn't incentivize people to do better because you're being penalised for it. That's artificial. That's different for a standard catch-up. Or perhaps if you're last player, you get a bonus because you're the last player. Or perhaps you're last player on this track, and then therefore you go first. The last player goes first. Well, that's fine. That's more natural, that catch-up, rather than it being artificial and harsh. So let's now move on to our number 4, and that is impactful take that. So I'm talking about the card of doom, that card that just destroys and wipes everything out. So this is quite common in some deck building games where you have this one epic card and it just devastates, it just gets rid of every single card, wipes it all out, absolutely blows everything up, just because that's the way the game is, that's the way it functions, that's a mechanism. There are cards that just wipe things out. Now, Ascension to some degree has a card where you have constructs and they're permanently in play, and that particular card can destroy 2 constructs. That can be quite meany because you think, well, great, I've got 9 points here for the end of the game, and I've got these abilities I can use every turn. Now I can't because they've been destroyed through 1 card. So it's cost me 2 cards, but it's costing 1 card. So there are cards that really destroy games and really make it feel too meany, too take that, too powerful. Especially if you've got a group of troops and perhaps these cards laid out and you find you've worked hard to get those cards and that one card just destroys every card that's in that row. Every card, and they're all gone. And you don't get them back. That is so impactful that it imbalances the game so much because now the other player's got such an upper hand because they've literally wiped your whole entire army out. So it's games that take that actions that really destroy another player, and it's far too impactful. So it's important as part of game design to balance that out so that it doesn't have too much of a negative impact, because take that is not fun for people. If it's subtle, then that's okay. That can be okay. If it's a little bit meaty, that can be okay because you're expecting that. Not this card of doom, it just destroys you. So let's now move on to our number 3, and that is endgame scoring impacted by hidden information. Now, I was quite surprised this came up quite a bit. So you have endgame scoring, but you're not sure what the other scoring is because there might be objective cards that are face down and you don't know what those objective cards are. So you don't know what the endgame scoring is. Now, there are a few games that do that. So Through the Ages, Civilization game, which is a really good game, it does have that hidden information in the game scoring that can frustrate people because you worked hard to build this empire up. You've got the civilization, you've got all these points, you're doing fantastic. You can see in the tracker, you're well in front. And all of a sudden, these cards come out that says, okay, the player with this scores this, the player with that scores that. And all of a sudden, you're now behind and they've caught up and they get a lot of points because they've met that criteria and those objective cards. That's what I'm talking about, that hidden scoring information at the end of the game. It can be extremely frustrating for people because you've planned, and obviously then that plan goes out the window because of those cards. So that can be frustrating. I understand it, and it is frustrating. And it's nerve-wracking as well because you're biting the nails when I hope that a card doesn't come out. It gives you those points. It's nerve-wracking. It's not fun. So let's now move on to our number 2, and that is being penalised passively. So what I mean is that you've been penalised for doing something or not doing something because of another player's action. And it's so impactful. So for example, you haven't actively done something that's given you a negative outcome, that because of your poor planning or poor actions. It's because another player has done something, or there's a rule or a card that flicks over, and that card impacts you negatively just because the rules and mechanisms, the way it works, provides that outcome. So events can be a classic example. You turn an event over and they're impactful. Now, if it's a mix of positive and negative and it's balanced, that can be okay, that's fine. But when it's negative and it's negatively impactful, that really significantly puts a dent in your gameplay, then that's not enjoyable. That could be extremely frustrating. Or it could be another player takes an action, and because of the action they take, that has a really negative impact on you. Not because you've done something, just because the rules state that. That's the way the game functions. That can be really frustrating, mind-boggling at times. You think, well, why? I haven't done anything, and I'm getting penalised for doing nothing. I can't do anything. I can't react. It'd be different if you could react to that or plan to be reactive. But when it's passively, through no fault of your own and not undertaking of any actions you've done, just because that's the way the game functions, that is frustrating. So let's now move on to the number 1. And a lot of people may disagree with this being number 1. To me, I would have put this at number 10 2 years ago. Now I would put this at number 1. And that's a thematic disconnect. Now, okay, a lot of Euro gamers will say, well, I don't care about the theme, I care about the mechanisms. It's not mechanics, it's mechanisms. Mechanics is your functions, is how you're going to change things. That's fine, that's okay. But a lot of people want to feel connected to the game. So if a particular action or how the game functions doesn't make any thematic sense, then it can be hard to wrap your head around, well, why am I doing, I can't make sense of that action. Why am I doing that action? It doesn't make sense. That can be frustrating for a lot of people. And I've played games where you'll exchange a resource into this resource and you're thinking, why? That's got nothing to do with that resource. Why? Just because that's how the game functions. Or I then do an action that has no thematic sense of why am I doing that action? It doesn't make any thematic sense. That disconnect can confuse people because you're thinking, okay, I've got all these actions. This does this and this does that. Okay, what does this action do again? Oh yeah, it does that. I think it does that. I can't remember because it makes no thematic sense. Having a thematic tie with the actions or the mechanisms of the game help to teach and play the game because it makes it much smoother. It makes it much easier to understand what you're doing. When there's a thematic disconnect, that makes it much harder and it makes it much more frustrating because you constantly have to flick through a book or a player aid to remember all the actions. And when it makes completely no sense, it can take you away from an enjoyable experience. Now, I played Boom Lake and I remember playing that game, and while mechanically it's sound, thematically, I was scratching my head going, I found the vase in the river, but where's the lake? There's no lake in the boat. Why are you calling it lake? Where's the lake? Oh, yeah, it's off the board. Okay, I'm in the river now. I'm going down the river. I'm finding a vase. A vase, what just appears in the river? Okay, somebody float in the river? Because it makes no thematic sense. Oh, I found some gold. That makes sense because I found gold in the river. That makes sense. Oh, I've got another vase. Oh, I've got another item. Why is that item in the river? Somebody floating in the river? They're dumping rubbish in the river? Makes no thematic sense. Okay, I've now got these tiles I can build. I've got these objectives. I'm like, okay, what's the thematic tie? When it makes it difficult to tie the mechanisms in with the theme, it can make it much, much harder to learn and understand the game, and that can be frustrating. I also feel a disconnect with the game as well if there's no theme. Now, 2 years ago, I wouldn't have bothered. It was all about the mechanisms. That's great. This function was fantastic. I was really into how all these mechanisms work. Now, I want the game to make sense. I want my actions to make sense and mean something. I want it to have purpose and a soul, not meaningless, just a bunch of mechanisms that have no sense, and it just becomes a machine that some people really enjoy and they love that machine and how it functions. But if there's no theme, it may feel a bit too samey and uninspiring long term. So that brings us to the end. I hope you've enjoyed this, and let us know down below in the comments. Do you agree with this list? Have we gone way off the list? Well, this is what the board gamers, the people, have chosen as their 10. But do you agree with the order of this? Perhaps you may, for example, disagree with the thematic disconnect being number 1. Perhaps that be down the bottom. Perhaps you wouldn't put on the list. Or perhaps there's others, like in-game scoring that's hidden with hidden information. Perhaps you wouldn't have that on the list. Perhaps it's okay in a game such as the one we suggested, I forgot what it's called, the civilization game. So perhaps you've got a different viewpoint on these. Let us know what they are in the comments down below. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and until next time, take care.